All right, so today we're diving into
Into the deep end.
a list.
Yeah, we're going deep.
A list of top 10 anti-SJW celebrities
Ooh.
from the Top 10's website.
Okay.
And it's really interesting because
Yeah.
it's user-generated content. So we're
Oh.
really getting
Yeah.
a raw, unfiltered look
Unfiltered look, yeah.
at how
Yeah.
at least some folks on the internet
Right.
define anti-SJW.
And that's a term that's really evolved over time.
Yeah, for sure.
You might be familiar with social justice warrior,
Yeah.
but online, it's become pretty loaded.
Oh, absolutely.
On one hand, it describes people
Right.
who are really passionate about social justice.
Yeah.
But on the other, it's often used as an insult
Mhm.
to dismiss or belittle
Yeah,
those views.
totally.
So they're a really powerful label
Okay.
with a lot of baggage.
So with that context in mind,
Yeah.
who are some of the names topping this anti-SJW list?
Well, right off the bat, we've got Ben Shapiro, described as the embodiment of common sense.
Hmm.
The entry even mentions his birth date, January 15th, 1984,
Wow.
and that he wrote his first book at just 17.
17. It's impressive.
I know, right?
Regardless of your stance on his politics,
Absolutely.
do you think that early achievement ties into
Potentially.
this anti-SJW perception somehow?
Yeah, I think there's often a perception that
Right.
anti-SJW figures are intellectually precocious,
Huh.
quick-witted,
Right.
and able to dismantle arguments with logic and reason.
Yeah.
So Shapiro's early success in writing could certainly
Revealed that.
feed into that image.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
So who else is high on the list?
Next up is Milo Yiannopoulos,
Okay.
called Funny, Charming, and Spitting Facts.
Yeah.
The entry lists his real name, Milo Andreas Wagner,
Wow.
and labels him a cultural libertarian.
Cultural libertarian.
Yeah.
What exactly does that mean?
Essentially means someone who believes in minimal government interference in people's lives, especially when it comes to free speech and expression.
Right.
Yiannopoulos has built a career on pushing boundaries and courting controversy,
Yeah.
which might explain his presence on this list,
He's definitely someone who knows how to get attention.
for sure.
And it seems like that's a common thread here, wouldn't you say?
It's definitely something to consider.
Yeah.
Now, this next one is interesting.
Okay.
We have Jordan Peterson,
Okay.
and the comments about him are all over the map.
Really?
Some call him a genius who has done so much good,
Wow.
while others find his views on politics and feminism so stupid that he can't be taken seriously.
Wow. Talk about polarizing.
Yeah.
Why do you think he elicits such strong reactions?
It's likely a combination of factors.
Okay.
He tackles controversial topics like gender roles and identity politics,
Right.
and he does so in a very direct, often confrontational style.
Yeah.
They can be appealing to some who feel those topics are tiptoed around too much,
Right.
but it can also be alienating to others.
Right.
Plus, his background as a clinical psychologist lends him an air of authority,
Right.
which some find persuasive and others find off-putting.
So he's tapping into that same sense of anti-establishment thinking
Potentially, yeah.
we see with some of these other figures.
It's about challenging the status quo and offering a different perspective.
Okay.
And remember, what makes someone anti-SJW is subjective
Right.
and often in the eye of the beholder.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Perception seems to be playing a huge role in how this list is shaping up.
Absolutely. And that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating.
Yeah.
We're not just looking at a list of names.
Right.
We're exploring how online communities define, categorize, and even weaponize labels like anti-SJW.
Okay, so we've got the intellectual firebrand,
Mhm.
the provocateur,
Yeah.
the controversial academic.
Uh-huh.
Who else makes the cut?
Well, this is where things start to get really interesting
Okay.
because we encounter some names that, on the surface,
Okay.
might seem surprising.
Okay.
Like Quentin Tarantino and Morgan Freeman
What?
are listed as the newcomers,
Hold on. Quentin Tarantino, the
Yeah.
guy who made Pulp Fiction.
the one and only.
What's he doing on an anti-SJW list?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
I guess so.
And that's exactly what we're going to explore in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay.
We'll delve into why these less obvious figures are being perceived this way
Okay.
and what that tells us about the evolving definition of anti-SJW.
All right, sounds good. So we left off with some pretty big question marks,
Some head-scratchers for sure.
like Quentin Tarantino
Yeah.
and Morgan Freeman being labeled as anti-SJW.
Right. Like, what
It seems so unexpected.
Yeah, it really highlights
Yeah.
how fluid and subjective this
Right.
label can be.
So how do we make sense of these newcomers?
Well, let's start with Tarantino.
Okay.
He's known for
Yeah.
his stylized violence and often provocative dialogue.
Right.
Some might interpret his work as insensitive or even offensive, particularly his portrayal of race and gender.
I mean, his movies definitely push boundaries.
They do.
But does that automatically make him anti-SJW?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
But remember, these labels are often less about concrete actions and more about
Uh-huh.
perceived attitudes.
Okay.
If someone sees Tarantino as celebrating violence or disrespecting certain groups,
Right.
they might categorize him as anti-SJW, even if that's not his conscious intention.
So it's more about how his work is interpreted,
Exactly.
not necessarily what he's explicitly saying.
It's about reading between the lines
Okay.
and projecting certain values onto these figures.
Okay.
And with someone like Tarantino, whose work is so stylized
Right.
and open to interpretation, those projections can run wild.
That makes sense for Tarantino, but what
Mhm.
about Morgan Freeman?
Right.
He's known for his wise,
Yeah.
grandfatherly persona.
Right.
How does that fit into the anti-SJW mold?
Freeman's inclusion is particularly interesting.
Yeah.
He's generally seen as a respected figure, but he's also made comments in the past that some are found controversial.
Like what?
For instance, he's expressed skepticism about Black History Month
Okay.
and has been critical of identity politics.
So even expressing a nuanced view or dissenting view within a community
Potentially, yeah.
can get you labeled anti-SJW.
It's certainly possible.
Okay.
Remember, the term is often used to shut down conversation or dismiss someone's perspective outright.
Wow.
It's a way of saying you're not on the right side of this issue without actually engaging
Right.
with the substance of their argument.
Wow. It's kind of disheartening to think that even someone as universally respected as Morgan Freeman can get caught in this crossfire.
It really underscores the point that these labels can be incredibly reductive
Right.
and often fail to capture the complexity of individuals' beliefs
Yeah.
and experiences.
Okay, so we've got the newcomers figured out.
Wow.
Who else on this list
Yeah.
challenges our expectations of what anti-SJW means?
Well, how about Judge Judy?
Judge Judy.
Yeah, she's described as anti-SJW, yet she is a very butch woman.
Wait, seriously. Judge Judy.
That's the one.
I don't even know where to start with that one.
It does seem contradictory on the surface, doesn't it?
Yes.
You have a strong, outspoken woman who's built a career on challenging people's behavior
Right.
and holding them accountable,
Yeah.
and yet she's being labeled anti-SJW.
It's almost like the list is implying those two things can't coexist.
Right.
That a strong woman or a butch woman
Yeah.
can't also be critical of
Yeah.
social justice movements.
It raises some interesting questions about how gender and identity intersect with these perceptions.
Yeah.
Is it possible that Judge Judy's perceived toughness
Yeah.
and no-nonsense approach clashes with certain stereotypes of what an SJW should be?
Maybe there's an assumption that anyone who challenges traditional gender norms must automatically align
Potentially.
with progressive social justice movements?
It's a fascinating dynamic to unpack.
Yeah.
And it highlights the need to move beyond simplistic labels
Okay.
and recognize the diversity of thought
Mm-hmm.
and experience that exists within any group, including those who might be labeled anti-SJW.
Okay, so Judge Judy throws another wrench into our understanding of this term. What other surprises does this list have in store for us?
Well, this next one is particularly unsettling.
Oh, boy.
We have Ronda Rousey on the list,
Okay.
and one user comment expresses a desire to see her beat up.
Oh, no.
A famous shrieking girl from YouTube.
Oh, wow. That's taking things to a whole other level. What's going on there?
That comment really highlights the aggression
Okay.
that often seeps into these online discussions.
Right.
It's a reminder that these debates are not just about abstract ideas.
Yeah.
They can tap into very real anger, resentment, and even violence.
It's like they're reducing these complex issues to a
Yeah.
physical confrontation,
Yeah,
as if whoever wins a fight
exactly.
automatically wins the argument.
And that kind of thinking is not only unproductive,
Right.
but it can also be incredibly dangerous.
Yeah.
It normalizes violence
Uh-huh.
and creates a hostile environment where rational discourse becomes impossible.
It's like those comments are saying, if you don't agree with me,
Right.
I'll just shut you up with force.
Exactly.
That's scary.
It's a terrifying prospect.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that we need to be incredibly mindful
Okay.
of the language we use and the way we engage
Yeah.
in these online debates, because words can have a powerful impact,
Absolutely.
and they can escalate quickly in the online world.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the heat of the moment
Right.
and forget that there are real people
Real people, yeah.
on the other side of the screen. We need to remember that empathy and respect
Totally.
are crucial even when we vehemently disagree.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that brings us to a figure who embodies the aggressive, confrontational side of this anti-SJW label.
Okay.
Ted Nugent on the list. Described as an animal hunter and gun nut who
Right.
vows to kill liberals like coyotes.
Whoa, okay, that's pretty intense language.
It is.
It sounds like this is moving beyond simple disagreement.
Yes.
And into something much starker.
It's certainly a disturbing example of the rhetoric
Right.
that can emerge in these online spaces.
Yeah.
The entry goes on to say he hates anyone that isn't neurotypical, white, heterosexual, cisgender, Christian, and conservative.
Wow, that's a pretty narrow view of the world.
It is.
It highlights the potential link between the anti-SJW label
Yeah.
and a more broadly intolerant or extremist ideology. Of course, not everyone who identifies as anti-SJW holds these extreme views.
Right.
But it's a reminder that these online spaces can attract and embolden those who do.
For sure.
It's a sobering reminder that words have consequences.
Absolutely.
And that online hate can spill over into the real world.
Precisely. And that's why it's so important to be aware of these dynamics and to push back against hate speech and intolerance whenever we encounter it.
So we've seen some pretty intense examples of what can happen when these online debates go off the rails.
Yeah.
But what about the less extreme figures on this list? The ones who aren't necessarily advocating for violence or hatred, but who are still being labeled anti-SJW. What's their story?
That's a great question, and it's something we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay.
We'll delve into how figures like PewDiePie and Tom Brady, who aren't known for their outspoken political views, end up on this list, and what that tells us about the broadening scope of the anti-SJW label.
Okay, so we've gone pretty deep into this anti-SJW list.
Yeah, we've seen the full spectrum.
We've seen some pretty wild stuff.
It's been a journey.
But let's circle back to those figures who seem a little out of place, like PewDiePie and Tom Brady.
Yeah, they're an interesting case.
What's the deal with them?
It seems like the anti-SJW label is kind of expanding.
Expanding how?
It's going beyond those folks who are actively opposing social justice movements. It's like it's starting to include figures who are just seen as not really being involved.
So you're saying it's not just about what you say, but what you don't say.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
In the online world, silence can be interpreted as complicity.
Wow.
If you're not, like, out there waving the flag, some people might see that as taking a stance against those causes.
So there's, like, this pressure to constantly declare where you stand on every single issue.
It can feel that way.
Okay.
And that pressure can be stifling.
Right.
People are afraid to speak up.
Yeah.
Afraid to ask questions.
Right.
For fear of being labeled.
Right. You know, I've even felt that sometimes.
Yeah, it's real.
And wouldn't that just make these online debates
it definitely
even more polarized?
It discourages real dialogue and, you know, that critical thinking.
Instead of talking, we all just retreat to our own little echo chambers.
Exactly. And that's not helping anyone.
So where does this leave us?
I think this deep dive really shows us that the internet is not this neutral space. It's this crazy, complex landscape shaped by algorithms and social dynamics and all these individual biases. It's a place where labels become weapons. Context gets lost. And nuance is like thrown out the window.
Yeah, for sure. And it feels like it's all spilling over.
Into the real world.
Into the real world, affecting how we see each other.
It's changing how we talk. About these really important issues.
So what can we do? I mean,
be critical.
Be
aware of your own biases. And try to have these conversations with empathy and, a willingness to listen. It's about moving beyond those simplistic labels and that black and white thinking.
It's not always so simple. It's messy.
It is messy.
And complicated.
Absolutely.
I think that's a great takeaway from this deep dive. We need to remember that these conversations have real consequences.
They do. They shape
our world.
The world we live in.
Couldn't agree more.
So as we navigate this digital world, let's try to do it thoughtfully. With respect for other viewpoints.
Absolutely.
And try to understand each other.
The goal isn't to agree on everything.
No.
It's to create a space where different perspectives can be heard and considered.
Well said.
Thank you.
That's a great place to wrap up this deep dive.
I think so.
I hope everyone listening will continue exploring these issues.
Yeah, dive in.
And, challenge their own assumptions and keep having these important conversations.
Keep talking to each other. So until next time.
See ya.
Keep diving and keep questioning.